The sound of the battle echoed in Elias's ears, but his focus remained sharp. The fleet was relentless, their massive ships closing in on the horizon with terrifying speed. Elias had bought some time for Varian's hope, but now he was running out of options. The asteroid field ahead was his only chance to shake the enemy, but it was also the most dangerous move he could make. "Luna, get me a readout on the nearest asteroids," Elias said, his fingers dancing over the controls. "I need a path through there." Luna's voice came through, calm but urgent. "Elias, the asteroids are large and moving at unpredictable speeds. A single mistake could destroy the ship." Elias's jaw tightened. "I don't have a choice." With that, he punched the throttle and sent the horizon hurtling into the field. The ship veered left and right, dodging massive rocks that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Elias's heart raced as he narrowly avoided a collision, feeling the ship shudder under the strain. "Elias, the enemy is still in pursuit," Luna warned. "You can't outrun them for long. They'll have you cornered soon." Elias's grip tightened on the controls. He could feel the sweat on his brow as he pushed the horizon to its absolute limits. "I'm not trying to outrun them. I'm trying to outsmart them." Meanwhile, inside Varian's Hope, Captain Threx watched the battle unfold on the main screen, his fists clenched tightly. They had made it to the station, but he knew it wouldn't be long before the enemy fleet came after them. They needed to prepare for what was to come, but there was nothing they could do for Elias now. "Captain, the station has completed our docking," Vea said, her voice calm but strained. "We're safe for the moment, but I don't think it will hold for long." Threx nodded, his mind still with Elias. He couldn't shake the feeling that the human was doing more than just buying them time. He was risking his life for them. And for what? They had only just met, and yet Elias was fighting like a man who had something to prove. "I'll never forget what he's done for us," Threx muttered to himself. "But we need to finish this. We can't afford to lose him." Elias was in the thick of it now, weaving through the asteroid field with no time to think. The enemy ships were closing in faster than he expected. His sensors screamed warnings at him, but he pushed them aside, focusing only on the task ahead. Every twist and turn had to be perfect if he was going to survive. The horizon shook violently as a blast grazed its shield, sending sparks flying across the control panel. Elias's teeth clenched, but he refused to flinch. He knew that if he didn't pull this off, there would be no second chance. Come on," he muttered under his breath as he darted between two massive asteroids, barely clearing them as the enemy ships followed close behind. He could see the opening in the field ahead, a narrow gap that might be his escape route. If he could get through it, he might just have a chance to shake them off. Luna's voice came through again, sharp and urgent. "Elias, this is it. The opening is ahead, but it's tight. You need to take it slow or you'll crash." Elias's grip tightened. There's no slow in a race. He punched the throttle one last time and rocketed toward the gap, threading the horizon through the narrow opening. His pulse pounded in his ears as the walls of rock closed in on him. He couldn't afford a single mistake now. The ship's engines roared as it shot through the gap, the asteroid field's danger fading behind him. He had done it, but as the ship cleared the field and he took a quick glance over his shoulder, he saw the enemy fleet regrouping, faster than he had anticipated. They weren't giving up that easily. "You're not done yet, human," Luna said, "but you've bought us some time." Elias looked at the control panel, his mind calculating his next move. The fleet was still behind him, but now he had a new plan. He could hear the rumble of their engines getting closer. He had no more time to waste. He needed to fight, but he had to be clever about it. "There's always a way," Elias muttered, his fingers flying over the controls. He pulled the horizon into a sharp turn, heading toward the dark expanse of space, hoping that the next move would buy him the seconds they needed to escape. Inside Varian's Hope, Threx and his crew watched helplessly. They had made it to the station, but Elias was still out there, alone, fighting for their lives. The crew had done their part. They were safe for the moment, but the real fight was still ahead. "Elias," Threx whispered, his voice filled with a mix of respect and fear. "Don't let them take you." The final stretch of the battle was closing in. It was a race against time, and Elias had given them their chance. Now it was up to him to make it count. The dark void of space stretched endlessly in every direction, dotted with stars that seemed cold and distant. The lone ship, battered and on the brink of destruction, drifted silently. Its once brilliant hull was now scorched with blackened scars from repeated attacks. Inside, the crew of the alien vessel, Varian's Hope, worked frantically. Their systems were failing, and their oxygen supply was rapidly dwindling. Captain Threx, a tall and commanding figure with deep blue skin and eyes sharp as blades, stood in the center of the chaos. His crew consisted of a diverse group, each from different planets within the Galactic Alliance. Medigvaya, with her soft features and delicate hands, tried to keep the injured stable. Engineer Lyra, a wiry creature with 4 arms, tinkered desperately with a console sparking in protest. "The power core won't hold much longer," Lyra said, her voice trembling. "We're going to lose life support." Threx slammed his fist against the nearest console, his calm composure beginning to crack. "Send out the distress signal again," he barked. "Someone, anyone, has to be listening." "We've already tried 6 times," Vaya whispered, her voice barely audible over the alarms blaring through the ship. "No one's coming, Captain." Threx clenched his jaw. Giving up wasn't an option, but hope was slipping away. The Galactic Alliance had strict rules against entering the uncharted sector, where they now found themselves, and they were paying the price for ignoring those warnings. Somewhere far away on Earth, a small monitoring station picked up the distress signal. A young technician, tired from a long shift, stared at the flashing red light on his console. He rubbed his eyes and leaned forward, disbelief spreading across his face as he read the message. "Captain Elias Carter," he muttered to himself. "This one's for you." Captain Elias Carter was known for 2 things: his unmatched skill as a pilot and his stubborn refusal to back down from any challenge. Sitting in the cockpit of his ship, the Horizon, Elias was mid-flight, testing out some new modifications he had made to the craft. The Horizon was his pride and joy, a sleek, agile vessel packed with human innovation. When the distress signal reached him, a sharp ping echoed through the cabin. Elias tapped a few buttons, and a holographic message appeared. The urgent tone of the alien voice needed no translation. Their words were clear. They were stranded, their ship was failing, and they were under threat. Elias leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed. Most pilots would have ignored a call like this. The uncharted sector was infamous for its dangers: pirates, rogue factions, and unpredictable space anomalies. But Elias wasn't most pilots. "These guys are toast if no one helps them," he muttered. He activated the autopilot and began plotting a course toward the coordinates included in the message. "You're really doing this?" His onboard AI, Luna, chimed in. Her tone was skeptical. "Of course," Elias replied, a small grin forming. "Can't leave them hanging. Besides, they'll owe me big time." Luna sighed. "This sector is a death trap. You're risking your life for strangers who probably don't even know what a human is." "Exactly," Elias said, his grin widening. "What better way to make a first impression?" As the Horizon's engines roared to life, Elias couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement. He didn't know who had sent the call, but one thing was certain: they needed a hero, and he was the best chance they had. Back on the alien ship, the crew stared at their failing systems, unaware that a lone human pilot had just set course to change their fate. The Horizon streaked through space, its engines humming like a perfectly tuned symphony. Elias Carter sat in the pilot's seat, eyes sharp and focused on the display in front of him. The uncharted sector loomed ahead, an area of space so unpredictable that even the most advanced galactic maps labeled it simply as no man's land. As the horizon approached the sector, Elias checked his systems, shields, fully charged, weapons, armed and ready. Navigation, questionable at best. He knew this wasn't going to be a smooth ride. Luna. Elias called to his ship's AI. What's the situation? Luna's voice echoed in the cabin, calm but with a hint of concern. Scanners are detecting multiple anomalies ahead. Gravity wells, unstable asteroid fields, and, she paused, traces of recent activity, likely pirate ships. Elias smirked. Pirates. Ha. Let's hope they're not morning people. He tightened his grip on the controls as the ship entered the forbidden zone. Almost immediately, turbulence shook the cockpit. A massive asteroid, spinning at an odd angle, appeared on the radar. Elias maneuvered swiftly, dodging it with practiced ease. You call this flying? Luna teased, though her tone was lighthearted. Relax, Elias shot back, grinning. This is just a warm-up. Meanwhile, aboard Varian's Hope, Captain Threx paced the bridge. The dim lights flickered as the ship's failing power systems struggled to keep up. Any sign of a response? He asked, though his voice carried little hope. Medic Vea, monitoring a console, shook her head. Still nothing, Captain. The distress signal is active, but... Her words trailed off as a low beep echoed through the room. Everyone froze, eyes locking on the blinking light on Vea's console. Wait, she said, her voice trembling. There's something. A ship, heading straight for us. Threx's sharp gaze turned toward her. Can you identify it? Vea's fingers danced over the controls, pulling up data. It's a single vessel. Small, fast, and it's of unknown origin. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They had called for help, but this was not what they expected. Elias didn't have time to celebrate his approach. The uncharted sector wasn't done with him yet. The radar lit up like a fireworks display, showing clusters of smaller objects rapidly moving toward his position. Luna, Elias said, frowning. What am I looking at? Scans indicate multiple small ships. Raiders, most likely, Luna replied. And they're closing in fast. Elias sighed. Of course they are. The first raider ship appeared on his screen, sleek and jagged like a predator. It fired a warning shot, the energy bolt flashing past the horizon's hull. Guess they don't want to talk, Elias muttered, gripping the controls tightly. The horizon rolled and banked as Elias outmaneuvered the raiders. He flipped switches, activating the ship's weapons. Twin lasers fired, hitting one of the raiders dead on. The enemy ship exploded in a flash, but more were coming. Elias darted through the asteroid field, using the floating rocks as cover. He flew with precision, weaving between obstacles while returning fire. The raiders couldn't match his skill, but their numbers made up for it. You're outnumbered, Luna warned. I noticed. Elias snapped, his grin replaced by determination. Just as the raiders were closing in, Elias spotted the alien ship ahead. Its battered hull glinted faintly in the distant starlight. He could see the damage clearly now. Holes in the structure, faint trails of smoke escaping into space. That's them, Elias said. As he neared Varian's Hope, he opened a communication channel. This is Captain Elias Carter of the Earth ship Horizon. I'm here to help. On the alien ship, Threx and his crew stared in disbelief. The voice was unfamiliar, the language strange, but the tone was unmistakable. Captain, Vea whispered, it's a human. A human. Threx muttered, his brow furrowed. Impossible. They wouldn't dare come here. But the screen in front of them didn't lie. A single ship was fighting off raiders, heading straight for them. Prepare to dock, Elias said through the comms, his voice steady despite the chaos. And get ready to move. We're not out of this yet. Threx hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Open the bay, he commanded. The crew scrambled to follow his orders as the human ship drew closer, its lasers blazing. For the first time in hours, A flicker of hope sparked in their hearts. Elias pushed the horizon to its limits, trying to outmaneuver the enemy fleet. His hands were a blur on the controls, guiding the ship through tight turns and dangerous speeds. The enemy wasn't far behind, and each moment felt like it could be his last. His mind raced with strategies, his instincts taking over as he used every ounce of his piloting skill to stay one step ahead. But even Elias knew he couldn't keep this up forever. "Luna, can you calculate an escape route?" Elias asked, his voice steady despite the tension. "I need a way out of here. Fast." "Calculating," Luna responded quickly. "There's an uncharted nebula in the next sector. If you can make it through, it will scramble the enemy's sensors and give us a chance to lose them. But the conditions are extremely dangerous." Elias gritted his teeth. "It's now or never. Let's go." He turned the horizon toward the nebula, pushing the ship even harder. The ship's engine screamed as he accelerated, the enemy fleet hot on his tail. Every sensor in the horizon was on high alert, flashing warnings about incoming fire and nearby obstacles. The nebula was close, but it felt like it was miles away. Suddenly, a series of blasts shook the ship. Elias gritted his teeth as the shields flickered, barely holding under the pressure. One more hit, and he knew it could all come crashing down. "Luna, how much farther?" Elias asked, his voice strained. "Less than a minute. Hold on." Elias tightened his grip on the controls, his mind sharp, focused entirely on the task at hand. The stars ahead blurred as he pushed the horizon into a steep dive, narrowly avoiding a hit from one of the enemy ships. Then, just as it seemed like the fleet was about to close in for the kill, the horizon shot into the nebula. The ship shuddered as the strange gases and particles of the nebula began to scramble their sensors. The enemy ships immediately slowed, unable to track the horizon through the cloud of confusion. Elias's heart raced in his chest, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to exhale. "We made it," he muttered, a small grin forming on his face. "Now, let's get out of here." Meanwhile, aboard Varian's Hope, the crew had been anxiously watching the battle unfold. Threx, standing at the helm, had his eyes locked on the main screen. He had been holding his breath ever since Elias entered the nebula. The human had given them a chance, but he still wasn't out of danger. "We can't wait any longer," Threx said, his voice steady but tense. "We need to prepare for departure. The enemy won't give up so easily." Vea, who had been monitoring the situation, turned to him. "Captain, Elias did more than we could have ever hoped. If we leave now, we might just make it. He bought us the time we needed." Threx nodded slowly. "But he's still out there, alone. We owe him more than just a safe escape." Elias's fingers flew over the controls as the horizon raced through the nebula. The strange gas cloud made visibility difficult, but it also gave him the advantage he needed. The enemy fleet had lost him for now, but Elias knew he couldn't stay in the nebula forever. The longer he stayed, the more dangerous it became. He needed to get back to Varian's Hope, and fast. "Luna," he said, "plot a course back to the station. We're going to rejoin the crew." "Understood," Luna replied, calculating the safest route now. As the horizon emerged from the nebula and back into open space, Elias breathed a sigh of relief. The enemy fleet was nowhere in sight, their pursuit thwarted for now. But Elias wasn't taking any chances. He pushed the ship into high gear, making a beeline for the station. Back on Varian's Hope, the crew was ready to leave. The station had provided them with temporary shelter, but the enemy was still out there. They couldn't stay forever. As the crew prepared to board the horizon, Captain Threx turned to Vea. "I never expected to owe a human anything," he said quietly. "But Elias has done more for us than I could have ever imagined." Vea smiled, her eyes filled with respect. "He's one of a kind, Captain." Just then, the sound of the horizon's engines filled the docking bay as Elias's ship returned. The crew gathered around, relief flooding through them, as they saw Elias step out of the cockpit, looking as confident as ever, despite the exhaustion in his eyes. Threx approached him, his expression a mix of gratitude and admiration. "You've saved us, human," Threx said, offering Elias a firm handshake. "I don't know how we can ever repay you." Elias smiled and shook Threx's hand. "I don't need anything, Captain. I did what anyone would have done." Vea stepped forward, her voice soft but sincere. "We won't forget this, Elias. You've proven that humans are capable of more than anyone ever realized." Elias's smile grew wider. "Glad I could change your mind." The neutral station loomed ahead, a towering structure of metal and glass that gleamed against the backdrop of deep space. Varian's Hope drifted toward it, its hull patched but still bearing the marks of battle. Elias sat in the pilot's seat, his fingers resting lightly on the controls as he guided the ship closer to the station's docking bay. His mind was already racing, thinking of the next steps. "Luna, status on the ship?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "The ship is holding together," Luna replied. "Barely. You might want to suggest a full overhaul when you can, but it should hold long enough for repairs here." Elias nodded, though he wasn't entirely satisfied. He could feel the wear and tear on the horizon too. Space travel wasn't for the faint of heart, but he knew the ship would need some serious work once they were done with the aliens' vessel. As the ship docked, the bay doors slowly closed, sealing them inside the station's protective walls. Elias stood up and stretched, eager to get some fresh air. The constant hum of machinery and the soft glow of the docking lights faded as he stepped into the bustling station. Captain Threx was the first to move. He had spent most of the journey quietly observing Elias, his mind still working through the events that had unfolded. He was a leader, and leaders didn't like to show weakness. But today, he had witnessed something rare, the bravery of a human who not only risked his life, but also worked seamlessly with an alien crew that wasn't his own. There was something about Elias Carter that couldn't be ignored. "You're not like the others," Threx said as they made their way toward the station's repair dock. "Most would have left us to our fate, but you stayed." Elias chuckled, but there was no amusement in it. "I don't leave people hanging, especially when it's a fight I can win." "You're more than a fighter," Threx said, eyeing him curiously. "What do you want from us?" Elias stopped walking and turned to face the captain. His eyes were sharp and direct. "Nothing, Threx. I didn't come here looking for a reward or to prove anything. I did what needed to be done." Threx nodded slowly, clearly intrigued. "You expect nothing?" he asked, though his tone was hard to read. "That's right." Elias smiled briefly. "I only want to make sure your ship's ready for the next fight. After that, we can go our separate ways." Meanwhile, in the repair bay, Engineer Lyra and the rest of the crew worked on stabilizing Varian's Hope's critical systems. Sparks flew from the console as she focused intently, cursing under her breath as another fuse blew. The ship had taken a beating, and while Elias had made sure they weren't dead in space, it would take time and effort to restore their full power. Vea, who had been quietly observing Elias, approached Lyra, her voice soft but inquisitive. "Do you think the human knows?" Lyra glanced over at her, wiping her brow. "Knows what?" Vea hesitated. "That we're not just stranded out here for nothing. That we've been hiding something." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "What are you suggesting?" Vea took a breath, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of the console. "The data we were transporting. It's important. Not just to us, but to everyone. It's something that could change the balance of power in the galaxy." Lyra stood still, the realization dawning. She didn't speak immediately, but her mind was racing. If Varian's Hope had been carrying something that important, it was no wonder they had been targeted. "I can't say for sure," Vea continued, "but there's something in that data that's connected to the energy source that powers our entire alliance." Lyra glanced around the room, ensuring no one else was within earshot. "You think the human knows this?" Vea hesitated before responding. "I don't know. But if he does, he might be able to help us. Elias, having finished his conversation with Threx, walked away from the group, his mind still churning over the encounter. It hadn't been an easy choice to intervene, but he had done it anyway. It wasn't about duty or glory. It was about doing the right thing. And that had always been enough for him. As he made his way down a narrow hallway, he noticed Vea and Lyra whispering nearby, clearly deep in conversation. The two of them noticed him and paused, but Elias didn't stop. He gave them a small nod and kept walking, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something more was going on. It wasn't until later that evening, after the repairs were well underway, that Threx invited him to dinner. The captain had asked Elias to join him, but there was something about the way Threx said it that made Elias feel as if there was more to the invitation than just gratitude. As they sat across from each other in the mess hall, with the quiet hum of the station's engines filling the background, Threx's voice broke the silence. The crew of Varian's Hope worked quickly, their movements tense and focused. Captain Elias Carter stood in the center of the chaotic bay, surveying the damage. The ship was in worse condition than he had imagined. Sparks flew from damaged panels, and the air was thick with the smell of burnt circuits. Elias turned to Captain Threx, who was watching him with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Your power core is on its last legs, and your shields are practically non-existent, Elias said, his tone serious. If the raiders get back in here, this ship won't hold. Threx folded his arms, his stern expression unchanging. We are well aware of our situation, human. What do you suggest? Elias smirked. Good question. I'm thinking we patch up your critical systems and make a run for it. You've got a safe harbor nearby. Threx hesitated, glancing at his crew. Medic Vea stepped forward, her soft voice breaking the silence. There's a neutral station 2 sectors away. If we can reach it, we might stand a chance. Perfect, Elias said. But first, let's make sure you don't fall apart halfway there. Elias got to work alongside Engineer Lyra, who watched him with all 4 of her eyes, clearly unsure what to make of him. The human moved with confidence, his hands flying over the alien controls like he had done this 100 times before. You're surprisingly efficient for someone unfamiliar with our technology, Lyra said, her voice tinged with disbelief. Elias grinned. Technology's just like people. It has its quirks, but if you figure out how to talk to it, you can usually make it work. Lyra raised an eyebrow, but didn't respond, instead focusing on stabilizing the power core. Meanwhile, Vea watched from the shadows, her medical supplies clutched tightly. She couldn't understand this human. Stories about Earthlings described them as unpredictable and reckless, but this man seemed to have an unshakable determination that bordered on reckless bravery. As the repairs continued, alarms suddenly blared throughout the ship. Threx barked orders, and the crew scrambled to their stations. What now? Elias asked, already running toward the nearest console. Vea's voice came over the comms, tense and urgent. The raiders are regrouping. They've sent reinforcements, and they'll be here in minutes. Elias let out a low whistle. That was faster than I expected. He turned to Threx. We need to move now. Threx's jaw tightened. The engines aren't stable yet. Then we don't have a choice, Elias said. He tapped his communicator. Luna, get the horizon ready. We might need some extra firepower. Always a pleasure to save the day, Luna replied dryly. The raiders arrived in force, their ships dark and menacing as they surrounded Varian's Hope. Energy bolts rained down, shaking the alien vessel violently. Elias sprinted to the cockpit, with Threx close behind. I hope you don't mind, but I'm taking over, Elias said, sliding into the pilot's seat without waiting for a response. Threx stared at him, momentarily stunned. You're flying my ship. Trust me, Elias said with a confident grin. I'm the best chance you've got. The ship lurched as Elias took control, weaving it through the chaos with the skill of someone who had spent his life in the stars. The alien crew watched in awe as the human pilot maneuvered their battered vessel like it was an extension of himself. "Lyra, keep that power core stable," Elias shouted over the comms. "Vea, make sure everyone's strapped in. This is going to get rough." The Horizon joined the fight, its sleek frame darting through the raider fleet. Luna coordinated the ship's weapons, picking off attackers with deadly precision. Together, Elias and his AA turned the tide of the battle. Finally, with the last of the raiders driven off, Varian's Hope limped toward the neutral station. The crew was exhausted, but their spirits were higher than they had been in days. As the ship entered safe space, Threx turned to Elias. For the first time, there was a hint of respect in his voice. "You're reckless, human, but I'll admit, you might have just saved us all." Elias leaned back in the pilot's seat, a satisfied smirk on his face. "Don't mention it. It's what I do." For the first time, Threx allowed himself a small smile. Maybe this human wasn't so bad after all. The raider ships swarmed like angry wasps, their weapons firing relentlessly. Energy bolts lit up the dark void as Captain Elias Carter piloted the Horizon with precision, weaving through the chaos. His eyes darted between the controls and the alien ship ahead, Varian's Hope. The vessel was barely holding together, its hull riddled with damage and its engines flickering weakly. "Luna, status on the docking sequence?" Elias asked, his tone sharp but focused. "The bay doors are open, but the raiders aren't making this easy," Luna replied. "You'll need to buy yourself some time." Elias grinned despite the danger. "Time's my specialty." With a swift flick of the controls, Elias brought the Horizon into a tight loop, spinning back toward the raiders. He unleashed a barrage of laser fire, striking two ships and sending them spiraling into the asteroid field. The explosion lit up the area, giving him a brief window to approach the alien ship. "Varian's Hope, this is Captain Elias Carter. Prepare for docking," he said through the comms. Aboard Varian's Hope, Captain Threx and his crew watched the human ship with wide eyes. The small vessel darted through the enemy like a predator, its movements precise and almost impossible to follow. "It's actually working," Vea whispered, disbelief in her voice. Threx clenched his fists. "Who is this human?" he muttered, half to himself. He turned to Engineer Lyra. "Prepare the docking bay. If he's risking his life to help us, we'll make sure it's worth it." The crew scrambled to follow orders. Inside the med bay, Vea tended to the injured, her mind racing. Humans were known only through scattered rumors in the Galactic Alliance, tales of their unpredictable nature and unmatched courage. She couldn't believe one had come to their aid. Elias brought the Horizon in close, the docking bay of Varian's Hope now in sight. Just as he aligned his ship, two raiders broke through the asteroid field, firing wildly. The blasts shook the Horizon, alarms blaring in the cockpit. "Shields at 60%, Luna reported. "You can't take much more of this." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Elias muttered. He flipped a switch, deploying countermeasures. A cloud of reflective particles burst from his ship, confusing the raiders' targeting systems. With a quick dive, he slipped past their line of fire and into the docking bay. The moment the Horizon landed, the bay doors sealed shut, cutting off the pursuing raiders. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Docking complete," Luna said. "Welcome to the neighborhood." Elias smirked. "Let's see if they roll out the red carpet." The airlock hissed as it opened, and Elias stepped into the alien ship, his boots echoing on the metal floor. He was immediately greeted by a group of wary crew members, weapons raised. At their center stood Captain Threx, his commanding presence unmistakable. Elias raised his hand slowly. "Easy there. I'm the guy who just saved your ship." Threx studied the human with narrowed eyes, his expression unreadable. "You're human," he said, his tone laced with suspicion. Elias nodded. "Guilty as charged. Now, do you want my help, or should I let the raiders finish the job?" The tension hung heavy in the air. Finally, Threx lowered his weapon and gave a curt nod. If you can keep us alive, we'll accept your assistance." "Glad to hear it," Elias said, stepping forward. "First order of business, patching this ship up before the raiders figure out how to breach your defenses." Vea approached cautiously, her soft voice breaking the moment. "You came here, knowing the risks. Why?" Elias shrugged. "Call it a habit. I don't leave people in trouble." She exchanged a glance with Threx, who seemed just as puzzled by the human's reckless bravery. "All right," Elias said, clapping his hands together. "Let's get to work. I didn't fly through a war zone just to watch this ship fall apart." The alien crew stared at him, a mix of awe and disbelief on their faces. For the first time in what felt like forever, hope sparked in their hearts. The calm that followed the destruction of the raiders didn't last long. Elias Carter knew it was only a brief respite before the storm hit again. His ship, the Horizon, had just finished taking down the last of the pirate vessels, but the ominous feeling that something much bigger was coming weighed on his mind. Luna, his ever-reliable AI, was on alert, and Elias trusted her instincts more than his own sometimes. "We need to get out of here, Elias." Luna's voice echoed through the cockpit, calm but insistent. "The fleet is closing in, and they're not going to give up. We can't outrun them." Elias slammed a fist against the console in frustration. He wasn't ready to back down yet. "We're not running, Luna," he muttered under his breath, eyes fixed on the starry expanse in front of him. "We're fighting." Inside Varian's Hope, the crew had been watching the battle unfold with awe. Captain Threx had never seen a human fight like this before. Elias didn't just fly the Horizon. He made the ship feel alive, moving with a precision that seemed impossible. Yet even with all of Elias' skill, Threx knew the fight wasn't over. The incoming fleet was too big, and their firepower far exceeded anything Varian's Hope could handle in its current state. "Captain, we're out of time," Vea said, her voice tight with urgency. She was still monitoring the ship's systems, trying to keep everything together. "We need to leave now, or we'll never make it out alive." Threx clenched his fists. He had known this moment would come, but it didn't make it any easier. "I won't abandon my crew." "No one's abandoning anyone." Elias' voice came over the comms, cutting through the tension in the room. "I'm giving you a window, Captain. You take that ship to the nearby station. I'll hold them off." The crew stared at the communications panel, shocked by the offer. Threx's jaw tightened. He had never asked for Elias' help, but he wasn't about to let the human sacrifice himself either. The alien captain knew that if they stayed, they'd all be dead. "Do you know what you're asking, human?" Threx replied. "You can't take on an entire fleet alone." Elias smirked, his tone confident. "I've got a plan." Elias pulled the Horizon into a sharp dive, heading straight for the approaching fleet. His mind was racing, calculating the best course of action. He couldn't take on the whole fleet directly. That was suicide. But he could buy enough time for Threx and the others to escape. "Luna, reroute power to the engines and weapons," Elias ordered. "We're going to hit them fast and hard, then break off. Give me everything you've got." The ship's engines roared in response as the Horizon shot forward, the sleek craft cutting through space like a bullet. In the distance, the enemy fleet came into view, massive ships with advanced weaponry, each one more terrifying than the last. Elias didn't flinch. This was the moment he lived for, and he wasn't going to back down. "Elias, the fleet is coordinating their attack. They'll be all over you the moment you make a move," Luna warned, her voice tinged with worry. "Just trust me," Elias replied, his eyes locked on the enemy ships. He pushed the throttle, sending the Horizon into a series of risky evasions, twisting and turning through the fleet's incoming fire. Blasts of energy missed him by inches, and Elias gritted his teeth, knowing he was taking a huge risk. The enemy fleet responded immediately, launching volleys of energy bolts in retaliation. Elias grinned through the tension. The Horizon was built for speed, and he was going to make sure they felt every ounce of it. He fired the ship's main weapons, taking out the closest enemy ship with a devastating shot. The explosion lit up space, and Elias took that brief moment to twist the horizon into a sharp turn, avoiding another barrage of fire. He didn't have much time before the enemy adjusted their strategy. Back on Varian's Hope, Threx was already preparing for the escape. He gave a final glance at the human ship through the viewing window as it danced through the enemy fleet, barely dodging shots. "Now," Threx shouted. The crew scrambled to execute the orders, and the engines of Varian's Hope roared to life. They were making a break for it. Vea quickly tapped into the station's communication system. "We're coming in hot. Open the docking bay, now," she shouted. The station responded almost instantly, but it would be a close call. As Varian's Hope shot through the space lanes, Elias continued to draw the attention of the enemy fleet, making sure the alien ship had a safe path. Elias pushed the horizon to its limits, flying recklessly, but strategically. He didn't care about his own safety anymore. Every twist, every turn, was aimed at giving the Varian's Hope the best chance to escape. As he unleashed a flurry of shots at the remaining enemy ships, his heart raced with the knowledge that he was running out of time. The quiet of the neutral station didn't last long. Even as Varian's Hope was being repaired, the crew knew that peace was temporary. The tension in the air was thick, with everyone on edge, waiting for the inevitable. Elias Carter was no different. After hearing Captain Threx's warning about the data they were carrying, he had a feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated. Elias stood in the observation deck, staring out at the vastness of space. The stars twinkled in the distance, a calm contrast to the storm brewing inside his mind. He had done his job so far, saving the ship, fending off the raiders. But he knew that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. "Luna." Elias spoke into the quiet of the cockpit. "Do a scan of the surrounding sectors. Anything unusual?" "There's a fluctuation in the nearby asteroid field," Luna replied. "Small ships moving at high speed, possibly raiders. They're closing in fast." Elias frowned. "I had a feeling." Back in the repair bay, Captain Threx paced restlessly. He had tried to remain calm in the face of the unknown, but the weight of the situation was starting to take its toll. He couldn't shake the fear that the pirates were just the beginning. What if there were other forces behind the attack on Varian's Hope? Vea approached him, her medical kit slung over her shoulder. "Captain, we're almost done with the repairs. The ship will be ready in a few hours." Threx nodded, but his thoughts were far away. "The ship is almost ready, but I'm not sure we are. We can't stay here much longer. If what's in the data gets out, it could mean the end of everything we've worked for." Vea placed a hand on his shoulder, trying to offer reassurance. "We'll make it through, Captain. We have Elias. He's a fighter." Threx didn't respond, his mind still on the data and the dangers it represented. He couldn't help but wonder if the human pilot, though skilled, would be enough to protect them from the storm that was coming. Elias returned to the cockpit just as the alarms went off. Luna's voice echoed through the comms, urgent and clear. "Elias, the raiders have returned, but this time they've brought reinforcements." Elias' grip tightened on the controls as he turned the horizon to face the incoming threat. "How many are there?" "5 ships, all heavily armed," Luna replied. "You'll have to be fast if you want to avoid getting caught." Elias grinned, his eyes narrowing. "Fast is my middle name." The raiders emerged from the asteroid field, their ships forming a deadly arc around Varian's Hope. Their weapons powered up, sending deadly bolts of energy toward the station, and the 2 ships docked there. Elias didn't hesitate. He gunned the engines and shot forward, weaving between the raider ships with expert precision. The raiders responded immediately, firing relentlessly. The horizon shook as blaster fire clipped the edges of its shields. Elias growled under his breath but didn't slow down. He had no time for caution. He needed to end this quickly. Luna's voice was steady despite the chaos. "Enemy fire at 70%. Shields holding, but not for long." Elias pushed the throttle forward, sending the ship into a dangerous spiral that avoided another barrage of fire. He dove toward the nearest raider, a sleek, black ship that seemed to be the leader of the group. With a flick of his wrist, Elias fired a well-aimed shot, destroying the raider's engine in a burst of flame. 1 down, 4 to go. Inside Varian's Hope, Threx and the crew watched in awe as Elias fought off the attackers with stunning skill. Vea couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for the human. She had never seen anyone handle a fight with such calm determination. But it wasn't just the fight that worried her. She had the nagging feeling that the raiders weren't here just for the ship. They were after something much more valuable. The data, she whispered to herself. She turned to Threx, who was staring out the window, his expression grim. "Captain, we need to move the data. If they know what we're carrying, this fight is going to get worse." Threx finally turned to her. "I know. We'll secure it as soon as we can. But right now, we need to keep Varian's Hope intact." As Elias expertly destroyed another raider, Threx knew they didn't have much time. The raiders weren't going to stop until they had what they wanted. It was only a matter of time before the entire sector knew about the data's importance. Elias pressed forward, his ship dancing through the enemy fire with fluid, calculated movements. He knew the raiders were smart, but they were no match for his skills. However, as the battle continued, he couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was at play here. This wasn't just a random raid. The last of the raiders exploded in a brilliant flash of light, leaving the area silent once again. Elias sat back in his seat, breathing a sigh of relief.